Scientists are finally revealing the DNA evidence they say helped solve one of history's biggest crime mysteries, the identity of Jack the Ripper.
What made Carole Lombard's final hours so hauntingly unforgettable? Because they were filled with both triumph and tragedy, light and darkness. Just hours before her death, Carole was standing tall before a crowd in Indianapolis, urging people to buy war bonds. She spoke with passion, flashing her trademark wit, making people laugh even as she called them to action. She had every reason to feel proud. And yet, as the applause faded and she prepared for the journey back to Clark Gable, fate was already in motion. Did she have a choice about taking that plane? Yes, in fact, she did. The plan was originally for Carole, her mother, and Otto Winkler to return home by train. Her mother even begged her to avoid flying that night, worried about the risks. But Carole was impatient. She wanted to get back to Hollywood as quickly as possible, back into Clark's arms. "Let's take the plane," she insisted. When her mother continued to argue, Carole jokingly suggested they flip a coin. Heads meant flying, tails meant the train. The coin came up heads. With a smile, she declared, "The plane it is." That single toss of fate sealed their destiny. What was the mood like on board before takeoff? It was late, quiet, almost serene. Carole and the passengers chatted lightly, no one aware of the danger ahead. The pilot, Captain Wayne C. Williams, was experienced, confident. They had flown countless flights like this before. Why should this one be any different? The plane lifted into the Nevada night sky, a dark desert stretching below, mountains looming in the distance. What happened in those final, terrible seconds? The aircraft veered slightly off course, and in the blackness of the night, the crew never realized how close they were to Potosi Mountain. There was no radar warning, no flashing alert, just the sudden sight of rock and earth rushing toward them. Some say there may have been a scream, perhaps the instinctive gasp of passengers who caught sight of the mountain at the last instant. But in truth, there was no time. The DC-3 slammed into the cliffs, bursting into flames, scattering debris across the Nevada desert. The horror was instantaneous. How did the news spread across America? By morning, headlines across the country screamed the unthinkable: Carole Lombard dead in a plane crash. Fans couldn't believe it. The glamorous comedian, the queen of screwball comedy, gone in a fiery crash on a lonely mountain. Newspapers were flooded with letters of grief. Radio programs paused to honor her. For a nation already deep in the grief of war, losing a beloved star felt like another cruel blow. What was Clark Gable's reaction when he saw the crash site? It was devastating. Clark insisted on traveling to Nevada to see for himself. He stood at the crash site, silent, broken, staring at the charred remains of the plane scattered across the rocky slopes. Some say he was hollow, almost lifeless. He personally identified Carole's remains. From that day forward, Gable was never the same. Some believe he carried a death wish after losing her, volunteering for dangerous missions when he later served in the U.S. Army Air Forces. To him, the love of his life was gone, and with her, much of his will to live. Did Hollywood honor Carole in a special way? Yes. She was the first American woman to be declared a casualty of World War II. Her funeral was a mix of star-studded sorrow and national mourning. Franklin D. Roosevelt even called her a heroine for her dedication to the war effort. At MGM, her colleagues spoke of her warmth, her humor, her generosity. For audiences, she wasn't just a glamorous actress, she was real, relatable, human. How is she remembered today? Carole Lombard's name still shines. Her films, from My Man Godfrey to Be or Not to Be, continue to make audiences laugh and marvel at her brilliance. But alongside that laughter is the shadow of her death. The horrifying final minutes of her life remind us how fragile even the brightest stars can be. And perhaps that's why her memory endures, because she lived with such light and was lost in such darkness. Carol Lombard's story is one of fate's cruelest twists: a coin toss, a midnight flight, a mountain waiting in the dark. Yet through it all, her spirit remains unbroken, carried forever in the laughter of her films and the love Clark Gable held for her until the end of his days. If this story touched you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and hit the like button.
But here's where it gets unsettling. The AI wasn't just asked to describe the language or style of the letters attributed to Jack the Ripper, it was asked to profile the psychology behind them. Using deep learning trained on modern criminal data, the system began to map patterns that human experts had missed for over a century. What it found shocked even the historians. Instead of a random killer driven by rage, the AI concluded that the Ripper planned every move with military precision. His word choice, his careful timing, and even the eerie taunts in his letters weren't the work of a madman spiraling out of control. They were the words of someone enjoying the game, someone intelligent enough to manipulate an entire city's fear. In fact, the AI compared his communication style with that of known organized serial killers in modern history. The similarities were chilling. Phrases in his letters revealed a cold detachment from humanity, mixed with sudden flashes of mockery that psychologists now recognize as signs of a narcissistic, sadistic personality. But then, the AI found something worse. It analyzed his choice of victims. For years, people assumed he picked randomly, targeting whoever he found on the streets of Whitechapel, but the algorithm suggested a pattern in geography and timing. The locations weren't random at all. They formed a calculated circle around key police patrol zones, almost as if the killer was deliberately testing the authorities, mocking their inability to catch him. And then came the darkest revelation. Using linguistic mapping, the AI reconstructed fragments of Jack's possible background. His writings showed formal education, a familiarity with medicine or anatomy, and a confidence in describing violence without hesitation. In other words, he wasn't some faceless monster hiding in the shadows. He might have been a respected figure of society, walking freely among the very people who feared him. Even more terrifying? The AI estimated his psychological profile with chilling accuracy. It described him as methodical, manipulative, and addicted to control, a man who didn't simply kill but orchestrated fear as if it were a symphony. This wasn't murder for survival or revenge, this was murder as performance. Imagine what that means. The most infamous killer in history may not have been driven by insanity, but by something far darker: pleasure in power. And as historians looked at the AI's results, many began asking a haunting question. What if Jack the Ripper didn't stop? What if, emboldened by his success, he continued killing elsewhere under different names, blending into society, his identity never uncovered? The AI doesn't give us comfort. It doesn't close the case. Instead, it leaves us with a chilling truth. The Ripper wasn't just a man of his time. He was a blueprint for the killers who came after him. So when we say AI just analyzed Jack the Ripper and it's worse than we thought, it's because now we don't just see a monster in the dark streets of Victorian London. We see a mind that could exist anywhere, even today. Because evil doesn't vanish, it evolves. As AI researchers pushed further into the analysis, one unsettling truth began to emerge. The killer's ability to plan wasn't random chaos, it was methodical strategy. The AI identified predictive loops in his movements, suggesting that Jack didn't simply stalk victims by chance. He created a kind of mental map, returning to certain alleys and corners only when the odds of success were highest. In modern terms, it was almost as if he was running a psychological algorithm in his head. Even more disturbing, when the AI compared witness descriptions with crime scene intervals, it concluded that Jack may have deliberately left false trails, lingering just long enough to be seen, planting confusion, and then disappearing into the fog. This was not the frenzied monster history painted, but someone who understood how to manipulate both space and perception. The program also raised another chilling possibility, that Jack might not have acted alone. By analyzing timelines and distances between murders, the AI suggested there were moments where one man alone couldn't have moved quickly enough between locations. Could there have been an accomplice, or worse, a hidden network? It's a theory historians have debated for decades, but AI has now given it statistical weight. And perhaps the most haunting revelation was not about Jack himself, but about society at the time. The AI found clear evidence in news coverage that exaggerated details, sensationalized theories, and even misreported facts created a perfect smokescreen for Jack to hide behind. In other words, it wasn't just Jack's cunning that allowed him to thrive, it was also the chaos and hunger for spectacle that surrounded Victorian London. AI hasn't solved the mystery, but what it has revealed is darker than expected. Jack the Ripper wasn't simply a killer. He was a manipulator of fear, a strategist of chaos, and perhaps the first criminal to weaponize society's own blind spots.